thank you all for joining us. The Columbian is pleased to welcome candidates for representative from the 17th Legislative District, Position 1. I'm Greg Jane, the editorial page editor. As mentioned, we are recording this. We'll post it unedited on our website. And then I'll let the board members introduce themselves. Scott?
Scott Campbell, previously publisher of the Columbian, excuse me, and recently retired. So I'm on the editorial board still.
And then Ben?
Congratulations, though, on the retirement, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ben Campbell, I'm current publisher of the Columbian and newest editorial board member. So thank you too for joining us today.
Thank you. And Callie? You're on mute.
There we go. I'm Callie Harris. I cover politics for the Columbian, and I'll be writing about this meeting and observing it, but I won't be.
Now move on to the candidates. Move on to the candidates. Just take 1 to 2 minutes to introduce yourselves, explain why you were running, and then we'll get into specific policy questions. And we'll start with Tanisha.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Tanisha Harris. I am running for 17th LD State Representative Position 1. As most of you know, I ran for this position back in 2018, and we came up close to 850 votes short. And so in the last 2 years, I have been closely watching the state legislature to see what is being done, what is not being done in regards to housing, education, healthcare, homelessness, mental health issues, and particularly the last 6 months with the COVID-19. For me, I'm a lifelong resident of the 17th LD, born and raised here, went to Evergreen High School, then Clark College, and then Washington State University, Vancouver. I spent 10 years working in the Evergreen School District in the areas of multicultural diversity education. And for the last 8 years, I've been a CASA program specialist, advocating for foster care youth throughout Clark County and Southwest Washington. For me, it's about doing what's best for our middle class and working class families, making sure they have the resources to be successful, adequate funding for our school districts. We have Evergreen, Vancouver, Hawkinson, Battleground, Richfield, school districts in the 17th LD, and I want to make sure that we are giving time, attention, and focus to those school districts and making sure that we have funding for them and that is equitable across the board. As you know, we have several of our school districts who are done a great job of passing bonds and levies, but that's not the case for all of our school districts. So I want to make sure all of our school districts are on equal footing. For me also with COVID-19, there's a lot of challenges that are now in place that we've never had to deal with before. And I feel that we need a good partner in the 17 to work with our local city, county, and state and public health officials to make sure that all the resources that are coming to our community get to our community, that we help our small businesses, and that we can safely and responsibly open back up our economy and get our kids back in schools and get people back in restaurants and working again. But we need to do it in a bipartisan way. We need to be collaborative. And I feel that my life experiences and my educational background, the things I've done in this community all lend to that effort. And I want to be the next representative and serve our community admirably up in Olympia.
Great, thank you. And Vicki.
Thank you. I'm Vicki Kraft. I'm serving as your current state representative, one of them in the 17th Legislative District. I have been very thankful to serve for 2 terms, finishing my 2nd term. I was very thankful to win the primary election this past August, and thank you for that. I have, as by way of background, I have been serving most of my time in the private sector. I've been an account manager with companies including Pillsbury, Dell, Frigidaire, also small businesses. And actually, while I was working with Dell, I worked in that capacity with school districts here locally, obviously, Evergreen and Vancouver school districts, but also with school districts across the state. So I saw the inequity firsthand. I saw the inequity in what that looks like in Toppenish versus Battleground versus, Vancouver or Camas, for example. And I've also been part of the legislature that was working on McCleary to make that equitable, and was also in the legislature in the following years when the Democrat majority broke the equity piece of that again, which was extremely unfortunate. I also, in my technology capacity in private sector, did work with state agencies, the state of Washington. So before I even got to the legislature, I was very thankful to have a strong insight and working understanding of how the state of Washington does or doesn't work. And since I've been there at the legislature, I've certainly seen more of what does and doesn't work, and I've been working more to bring solutions that will work for you, because you are the ones that we are to represent as state representatives and legislators. It's your money as taxpayers that we have to be protecting, be very diligent with, and make sure we are spending what does get spent wisely and is not wasted. And I've seen a lot of challenges with money that has not been spent well. And you have too, obviously, as we've seen the EST issue. Finally, I will say I'm thankful to have roots here in Washington. My mom is from Yakima, and my dad came out in the Army. He went to Fort Lewis, met mom on a blind date, and the rest was history. So I grew up in Michigan. I graduated from Michigan State University with a bachelor degree in advertising, and my husband and I live in Vancouver, Washington. So we'll look forward to the rest of the discussion, and thanks for joining us today.
Great, thank you both. And before we start, I apologize in advance if I have to cut you off on occasion. We'll try to keep this moving. We have a lot of topics we want to get to. And so anyway, I apologize for that. But let's start out with, obviously, one of the big issues facing the legislature will be the response to the pandemic. What role should the legislature do? How should we address the budget? And we'll start with Vicki.
Thank you. Well, as far as how to address the pandemic, I think, we've seen a lot of responses along those lines. Certainly, I've heard from constituents telling me a lot of different aspects of their thoughts and views, and I respect that everybody has their own thoughts and view on this. I believe at this point in time, we have seen from the time that we all, in good faith, locked down, everybody stayed at home, we were trying to figure out what COVID was, that good faith effort and time by the people to shut everything down, stay in their houses, has been a challenge, I'll say. We saw it start at that time, basically propelling a challenge with overall people's health and well-being. So financially, mentally, emotionally, I was just being told about, suicide rate increases again this last week. Certainly, physical health challenges with stress, etc. The overall impact negatively to our constituents and people across the state of Washington's health and well-being has been very challenging. And I would say at this point, because we're still seeing things being held in lockdown or semi-lockdown status, depending on your industry, and many businesses are still vastly suffering. That is real. People have lost money, jobs, kids are not back in school, they're not getting quality education. This is a real challenge.
But how should the legislature address it?
Basically, very simply, if the governor, who is, as this current date, acting as a sole dictator, the legislature is not involved and really has not been involved in any decisions since March. Let that sink in. We're supposed to be a representative form of government. He's making all the decisions. We need to come back into session, really a special session. I still say it should have been done by now. And we need to be safely reopening our communities and our economy again. We do need to be sure that we're watching those who are vulnerable. We can safely reopen. That's already been proven. Most of us have been shopping in grocery stores and home improvement stores since the beginning of this pandemic issue, crisis, whatever you want to call it. So at this point, realistically, we should have already come back to special session. Washington should have taken care of its people as an initial response, not waiting just for the federal government. If you're really concerned about people, we had $2.5 billion that has been sitting in a rainy day fund. If we really care about Washingtonians, we should have addressed it directly and been accountable to help our people first.
Okay,
we could have done that.
Sorry, I need to.
We just need to safely reopen up, let our economy move and work, and get people back to full-time employment, let their businesses thrive, create jobs, make sure that people that are having emotional and mental challenges can get the help they need.
Okay, and I'll come back to that. I want to follow up on that, but I want to go to Tanisha. How should the legislature address this?
First, thank you for the question. First, I want to extend my condolences to those who have been affected by COVID. We have had over 200,000 Americans die due to COVID. We have had over 3,200 cases right here in Clark County of people having COVID-19. I know people personally who have suffered from COVID-19 and what the long-term lasting effects that may be from it too. Also, we've had over 50 deaths here in Clark County. And I know of several people, friends of mine, who've lost their loved ones and relatives, including a friend of mine who lost her father 2 weeks ago to COVID-19. So I think we need to acknowledge that this is real. It is affecting our families in so many different ways. And it is not a joke. It is not a hoax. It is not something that was just going to, by miracle, go away. And it's disappointing that we have elected officials who think that way. And that doesn't help when we have to have all voices at the table in order to safely and responsibly, that I've been saying for many months now, open up our economy. Nobody likes being stuck in phase 2. I certainly don't like being stuck in phase 2. There's things I like to do personally and professionally to get us into phase 3. But what I do know from a state legislature point of view is that we have to not act like we are doctors and scientists. We need to work with our public health officials at all levels, whether it's federal, state, county, and city. In terms of a special session, this is something that I was being told about back in April, that more than likely we have a special session, and I was looking forward to seeing that special session and what took place. But something that I know about special session is that this is taxpayers' dollars. So if you're going to have a special session, we need to make sure that there are absolutely positive results coming from that, and that there are solutions that are bipartisan that will stimulate our economy and get things back and moving. Yet I don't know if either side would have the votes or the political courage to do what needs to be done in special session to move us forward. So right now we have to work together. We have to social distance, wear a mask, proper hygiene when we are out in public. We have to acknowledge and reward those small businesses and restaurants who are doing all that they can and work with them and listen to what their needs are. I am aware that there are conversations all the time going on between elected officials and state officials about the progress we're making, the solutions that still need to be on the table, reaching out to various industries. I was happy that our construction industry was back up and moving again. Here in the 17th, we have Evergreen School District that are in the process of building schools. And we have 3 brand new schools that opened up beginning of this school year. There's not kids in them yet, but hopefully there will be. But we are back to doing construction. And that's the things that we need. But we did that because we worked together and we weren't putting up barriers to make sure our economy is back up and going again. Just this past weekend, I was at one of my favorite restaurants, a maid event on the east side, and they've done a great job of taking care of not only their employees, but the public too that comes in. And that's what we need to do. We need to be working together and recognizing who is doing what and who's doing things in the right way. And having elected officials out there acting like this is a joke and just open up everything automatically, we're going to cause setbacks. We're going to cause setbacks to our economy and to the community, and we're going to go backwards and not forward.
And I want to follow up on that. And as Vicki, from very early in the pandemic, you promoted and participated in protests of the shutdown orders. Do you think is that responsible for a state leader to engage in that?
I guess you really have to ask the question, Greg, and I appreciate the question. You really have to ask yourself the question, is it responsible for a state representative to represent the people? Because that is exactly why I went. Governor Inslee was not listening and still isn't listening to the legislature. That is the primary reason I went, was to make sure that people's voices were heard. There were numerous, as you all know. I mean, when the shutdown happened and we were in March and April timeframe, especially into April timeframe, you know, we were writing letters as legislators trying to encourage the governor to look at, you know, how he was reopening. And to Tanisha's point, I don't like saying my opponent. To Tanisha's point, you know, she mentioned construction. I'll tell you, that was, yes, it was good when it finally got back up and running, but initially the governor shut down private construction, but kept essential public construction. Now, how hypocritical is that? Yet the governor wasn't listening to legislative letters, suggestions, bipartisan letters I've signed on to on many issues. So because of that, I went to, you know, I do have political courage. To Tanisha's point, I have political courage. My votes show it and my actions show it. And that is exactly why I went to the Capitol, to make sure that no matter who you are, whoever you are, no matter what your background, whoever you are, that your rights and your freedoms were being heard by the governor. And after that initial rally, he saw, in my opinion, that, you know, people weren't just going to take this and just stay quiet and let everything collapse around them, including their own health and well-being. So basically, it was not until after those rallies that he really started opening things back up. Essential recreation activities beyond walking, right? Getting out and fishing. And, you know, we started seeing small movement then of basically reopening businesses. So, you know, when I talk about, you know, making sure the people's voice is heard, that is critical to me, making sure that your voice as a citizen here in the 17th legislative district and constituent is being heard. And at that point, the only person that would have any ability to change anything, because he designed it that way, was the governor. So I thought, yep, you bet, I'm going to go and make sure the people's voice is heard. And a lot of those people there were US flags everywhere, and they were there to say, we need freedom. We need to be able to reopen. And, you know, I said it, and I've said it continually, and I'll still say it. We do need to make sure that we are being watchful and thoughtful as we safely reopen for our vulnerable population. The elderly are, you know, they are impacted by COVID, but the other reality is the CDC recently said only 6% of the deaths were COVID-19 only deaths. 94% are comorbidities, meaning they have heart disease or diabetes or other very serious already existing conditions. And, you know, Secretary Weissman at Department of Health was asked that question of, do you count a death as a COVID death if there's a comorbidity? And he said yes. And I've also asked for source information from Secretary Weissman, just the beginning of August. You can do a public records request, and it will show an email I sent to Secretary Weissman of Department of Health, the governor's chief of staff, his legislative director, and the Four Corner leaders, and basically just said, would you mind, since we're seeing a case and spike in positive cases, they said there was a resurgence, right, end of July. I said, would you just provide the source information? You have to be collecting it, so there's no double counting of cases, to the legislature. Easy table report, you have to already be getting the information. And I got a response back from the governor's office, not even the Department of Health, who I addressed it to. And basically they said, so sorry, I can't produce customized data sets for you. And I just said, you've already got the information. It's a very simple table. You send it to Nancy Bickford. She already sends us ongoing information from the state an operations center. This is not hard. And a week later, Greg, they had not responded to my request again. So,
Well,
so you have to question the validity of the process.
Mention going to the rally in Olympia. I believe you also were involved at a rally at the county courthouse. And my understanding is that most people did not have masks, did not socially distance. Is that encouraging behavior that has prevented us from getting further in this pandemic? Couldn't you argue that that's why we're still in phase 2 in Clark County?
I would not necessarily say that. Here's the reality. For those who are vulnerable, this is what as we look at data, right? We're talking about the data. If we look at the vulnerable populations, they are, by and large, the majority of them are the elderly. Anybody who comes to a rally, no matter where it's held, no matter what kind of rally it is, right? Really, let's just go there for a minute. People that go there are going there by their own choice and their own volition. And, in most cases, I'd say most all of the rallies we've seen of any kind of nature, a lot of people have not been wearing masks, but some have. And so some can, and if they choose to, they can.
But the question is, doesn't that perpetuate the pandemic? Does that contribute to our standstill and our inability to move forward?
Here's the thing. When I came back after the first rallies, nothing changed in the death rates, to my knowledge, significant spikes or anything like that. We have been and remain at a very low death rate in our county and in our state. And when people focus on the positive case number, that means nothing. Let me say that again. It really doesn't mean anything because it's the death rate that matters. The positive cases, again, if that was really important and really tightly correlated to seriously negative, fatal impact, then why won't the Department of Health or the governor's office give us as legislators the source data just showing you this is where, these are the cases being reported in? Why won't they? Greg, no, I am not seeing the direct correlation, and I don't agree that the number of positive cases is the reason to keep us in a mostly shutdown, not full, but to keep our economy limping along, people mentally stressed because they can't get jobs. This is extreme. It's time to start safely reopening.
Tanisha, do you think the positive case numbers mean anything, or did they mean nothing, like Vicki said?
They mean something to the families who are affected by this. They mean something to our businesses who can't reopen fully at 100% full capacity because of the guidelines that are in place. And that is why I think it's irresponsible to dismiss anybody's death, anybody who has COVID-19. You had mentioned, Greg, earlier about these rallies. As a woman of color, as somebody who has Jewish friends, and as somebody who has heard from families across the 17th LD, I would just like to say that when an elected official goes to a rally, you have to be careful as to who are the people at that rally and who you are surrounding yourselves with. And we have seen pictures at these different protest rallies about opening up our state, opening back up our economy. And there are people at these rallies who are members of known white supremacy groups and hate groups, and people who are holding Nazi flags and have signs that are referencing the Holocaust. I have several friends of mine who saw these pictures and said, what the hell is going on here? Why do we have elected officials at these type of rallies? What does these symbols and this message have to do with opening back up our state? and our
I
freedom
would like
too.
to answer that, Greg.
That's really disturbing and bothering to a lot of people.
Acting as a
Especially
dictator.
when we have elected officials, if you're going to wear your official name badge at some of these rallies too. I think we have to be careful about where we show up and who we are surrounded by and the messages that are coming out. I think we can all have discussions about how we safely and responsibly open up our economy and get our state moving back again too. But when we have these other distractions and these other elements coming into play, the message is lost. And that's really quite disturbing to me and to a lot of people here in Clark County.
Vicki, you wanted to respond to that?
Thank you, Greg. Let me really be clear. First of all, I've never seen yet a Nazi flag. Maybe there was one there, who knows? You know what? Somebody could have come and been the plant to be there with one. Let's just say it, right? That's kind of the unfortunate, very pathetic political climate we're in these days. If there was a Nazi flag there, along with the tons of U.S. flags, U.S. flag shirts, freedom, standing for our constitutional rights, people and shirts that I've surrounded myself with that were there at that event, if there was a Nazi flag, let me tell you exactly what that would mean. Nazi represents Hitler. Hitler was a dictator, one man dictating to his country and trying to dictate to the world what needs to happen. Governor Inslee is acting as a dictator. As I've just shared earlier, he alone has been the one person making decisions for every person in the 17th legislative district and across Washington. The legislature has not in any meaningful way been involved in these conversations. That's not bipartisan. That's not collaborative.
Let's move on to regarding the pandemic and the economy and how obviously there's going to be a big hit to the state finances. How should the legislature address that? We'll start with Tanisha.
I think coming up this January, the state legislature is going to have a lot on their plate. And this is going to be how the main focus of the state legislature is addressing our economy. We are going to have to look at any fourth quarter reports that will come out in terms of the revenue stream that has come in for these fall months to see exactly where we're at to get a true picture. They're going to have to look at the budget to see, do we raise revenue? Do we do budget cuts?
What would you recommend?
I would look at both. But for me, it's looking at raising revenue that makes sense. We all know we have an upside down tax code that needs reform in that too, to raise those revenues. We're looking at cuts. I would not put any cuts on the table and vote for cuts that hurt working and middle class families and that would destroy the social safety net of our communities. When it comes to healthcare, education, mental health, I would not want to do those cuts whatsoever.
Then how would you raise revenue? How would you recommend that?
We're going to have to look at what our revenue streams are and readjust the tax code. So looking at what all the options are when it comes to revising our tax code. And if that looks at closing the corporate tax loopholes, looking at a capital gains tax, then we may have to go that route. But I think it's long past due that we have that conversation. There is also the report that will be coming out in December, but the tax policy work group that has been doing work for the past year or two that will give us some guidance and possibly some recommendations how to move forward to adjust our tax code and what type of revenues sources that we need to. I would state for the record, I've always been on the record with this many years now too, having grown up in Southwest Washington, is that I am opposed to an income tax. I always have been living here in the 17th and having family and friends who cross the bridge every day for years now who have to pay an income tax over in the Portland-Multnomah County side of things too. So we have to look at everything. And again, you know, what makes sense, what doesn't, but also protecting those who are most vulnerable and also not learning from the mistakes that were made in the past when we had our last recession back in 2008 and 2009.
Vicki, how do we address the budget shortfall?
Well, I look at the government's budget and budget process as I sit on appropriations. I look at it very much like you or I would have to do our household budgets. There needs to be accountability, and there really isn't in a lot of cases. We've seen taxes go up. I think there were 12 tax increases by the Democrat majority here over the 2019 timeframe. So just in the last couple of years. There was McCleary that was passed, right? And that was to benefit education, but that raised property taxes. We don't need to be raising more taxes. I think, unfortunately, my concern is that the current Democrat majority is tone deaf to the challenges, that serious challenges that people are really facing. Over 1 million people, over 1 million Washingtonians lost jobs and had to go on unemployment. There's still a very high number that are on unemployment. They're already hurting. Business owners are on the verge. In many cases, our restaurant owners here, I'm on those restaurant owner calls weekly. They don't know, once it starts raining, there are several that don't think they're going to be able to continue, and they probably won't be able to. And these are realities. Let's just be honest. When people and businesses take a financial hit, so do governments, right? So here we are talking about the question. I believe that the government needs to tighten its belt, look at where we've been wasting money. We don't need to spend money. There are, vulnerable communities that, no, do I think we need to be doing, massive cuts all over the place? No, I think we need to be prioritizing, just like a household budget. Where do we need to make sure we're funding? But where can we hold off on some funding here in the next biennium or two and be wise?
So if it were solely up to you, what would you cut? We're facing, latest projection is $4.5 billion shortfall between now and mid 2023. Which programs would you cut if you were in charge?
Well, I think I'll tell you, there's a lot of things that have the potential to be cut. How you cut something, right, and to what degree? Do you just lop the whole thing off, or do you go in and slice carefully certain things, certain programs, but not all programs? Those are the kind of things that I would look at specifically.
What kind of programs?
Ecology, I think, is one agency that we could afford to slim back on.
And I'm sorry, you went out there for a second. What did you say?
Oh, I think Department of Ecology is a strategic place to look at where we could streamline things. I think Central IT, formerly known as Central Technology Services, now called WATEC. I have proposed legislation on how to right-size that agency, which was found by the State Auditor's Office in 2017, I believe. I think it was 2017. They were found to be losing up to $10 million per year over a decade. And I knew there was loss there because of my previous private sector work with them. I was pretty suspectful that was the case, and it was. So look, JLARC, I sit on the Joint Legislative Audit Review Committee. We hear about all the time, oops, we paid out $1 million in this Medicaid program to people that they qualified initially, but whoops, they didn't later. There's a lot of opportunities to streamline the money that gets spent and do it much more strategically and prudently.
I have no idea. What is the entire budget for the Department of Ecology?
Oh, I don't have their current figures right in front of me, and they're one agency, right? So you're not going to get to the $4 billion shortfall there, but there's plenty of ways that we can delay some projects. There are certain aspects, certain programs that we could probably pause. And here's the bottom line, Greg. This is it right here. The government is the worst nonprofit, in my opinion. They are not efficient, nor are they effective as much as local community nonprofits and organizations, and even local government, right? these people, churches, faith-based organizations, they're in the community. They know the real needs. They're close to the needs. If people could keep more of their taxpayer money, I would rather see you keep your taxpayer money, determine where your family's priorities are and needs, fund those first, and then as you have extra and or you'd like to give strategically in our community, right? I've worked with nonprofits. I was a grant writer. So I've worked as a grant writer helping nonprofits who help those who are most in need. And they have to do more with less. And so they do a great job. And I believe if people locally had more of their money, you know, look at what the Community Southwest Washington Foundation just did, right? Give More 24, last September 24th. People gave, I gave, you know, and they match. And that's awesome. That's how we can really make.
Would you even after the pandemic, would you advocate for cutting taxes even more so people can keep more of their money?
Yes. I mean,
okay,
I think, right now.
Then what else do we cut? What services do we cut?
I'm sorry?
What services do we cut?
Well, I can't give you the whole laundry list. I haven't gone through every single program and every single agency at this point. But yeah, there are opportunities. Trust me. I mean, just like I mentioned, the Central IT Agency, there's money that's going out that is not strategically or wisely being spent as it could and it should. And that is just
we'll move on here. I want to move on to a couple of other quick issues. Tanisha, what would you recommend? How would you approach transportation and the I-5 bridge? And should we focus on a third bridge first? What would be your preference if it were solely up to you?
If it was solely up to me, my first priority would be replacement of the I-5 bridge. I tell people all the time, and those, especially my friends and family who complain to me about the traffic, I'm stuck in traffic again. We could be in what, year 4 or 5 of replacement of that I-5 bridge. If we did not have 2 state senators back in 2014 who voted against the transportation package that included the funding for the I-5 bridge, instead of us having to do replacements and or repairs here and there. So I-5 bridge replacement, I'm glad that we finally have Oregon and Washington are finally back at the table working together to move that project forward. When it comes to a third bridge, you know, over the years now, it seems like for the past 10 years, you hear people talking about a third bridge, but a third bridge to nowhere. Exactly where in Oregon is the third bridge going to go? And it always seems to be in the past about always east of I-205. And I tell the story all the time about my family members who live out in Gresham teasing me about, are they getting a third bridge? Is there going to be a third bridge landing in Gresham, or where's this third bridge going to land to? We can't talk about a third bridge until we have the replacement of the I-5 bridge first too. Yeah. I know there are ideas about a west side third bridge too, that I think that we definitely can be looking at possibly in the future, but the I-5 bridge is what we need to focus on at this time.
And Vicki, what would be your preference?
Well, the voters have said they do want a third bridge. They said that back in 2012, 2013 timeframe. And if we're looking at, you have to define the problem that we're trying to solve, right? That is what, with any business challenge or government challenge you should be doing. So the challenges that we're trying to address, congestion and reducing congestion on the I-5 bridge. If we are going to do that successfully, common sense just says you need more lanes. Well, if you add a third highway or bypass around the west side in particular, again, if we're looking at congestion on the I-5, not 205 right now, we're looking at congestion on the I-5, then the way to reduce it is to make sure you have a third bridge, not going to nowhere. Actually, I've been in and done town halls showing maps directly where you could start from. It could start from Woodland, potentially Ridgefield, go in and around. You could either use Fruit Valley area and or go around over to Highway 30, use the West Hills. That's one solution, right? There's several paths.
Is anybody in Oregon willing to do that?
I've actually had a conversation with at least one senator there, Senator, I think now would be safe to say, Betsy Johnson. who is over in the Scappoose area, and Highway 26 impacts her area. And she actually, yes, I mean, she was looking at funding. This was a few years ago. We had the conversation. I called her and asked her her perspective. Again, bipartisan, by the way. She happens to be a soft Democrat, apparently, from what I understand. But at any rate, we were talking about that, and she said, yeah, I'm actually looking at more funding for the Highway 26, which, yep, it could help with that. And there have been some discussions in Oregon about a bypass on the west side, because everybody recognizes the I-5 replacement alone is not the solution. Nobody's even told us exactly how many new lanes are going to be on that specifically. Bus rapid transit's a big priority on it. I don't think that's going to reduce congestion of people that want to drive their cars. And a PEMCO survey back 2018 in, I believe, July, showed that 600 Washingtonians and 600 Oregonians preferred to drive their car to and from work because it was easier and faster.
And so your
plan's not going away. We have to address it. We need to provide more real lanes and throughput, and for trucks also, right, for our business community, so they can keep moving, not get stuck, not, escalate business costs.
You would prefer a third bridge before replacing I-5?
Yes, we have 50 more good years at least on the I-5.
Okay. And then and I'm sorry, I want to move through several topics rapidly. It been a lot of discussion about racial justice. I'm just curious, Vicki, do you believe that systemic racism exists? Is it a problem? What should the legislature do about it?
Well, I wish I could read a response I sent to a constituent, but I won't for time's sake. The bottom line is this. I believe that God created every person. And so therefore, I believe every person, no matter who you are, you're special and important.
Okay, but some people don't believe that. So the question is, does systemic racism exist?
So here's what I have seen, and this is probably the best way for me to address this. When I was in Michigan State University, over 40,000 students, I served in the student government there. And one of the first things, this was, and forgive me, but this was really eye-opening, so I'll just say it, and gets to your question, Greg. So we had a gentleman come in, an African-American gentleman come in, and he talked about, wanting to fight for more ability to, get students of color into the university with lower grade points, make it more fair for them to be able to get in. And I was just, listening and taking this in. And he said there would be a sit-in at the administration building to, basically make the statement that, this was needed. And so the sit-in took place, and a friend of mine went just to go pay her bill. She happens to look like me, I'll say it that way. She went to go pay her bill, and she was just literally trying to get into the building. And two gals of color were, young ladies of color were standing there, along with a police officer, a security person. And my friend was like, can I just get in to pay my bill? And they were like, no, you can't get in. You can't get in. And my friend had no clue what to do, right? So at any rate, then, being from Detroit, not from Detroit, excuse me, from Michigan, I'm aware of Detroit and some of the challenges there. I've also lived in Atlanta, Georgia. I have personally not seen or experienced a lot of, what I think would be traditionally called racism. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, okay? I just gave you a few snapshots of things that I have experienced that I'm not going to sit here and say I don't think people are necessarily always treated fairly and equally. That's where I do believe that needs to change, as far as treating everyone with equal respect, right? We shouldn't really, I mean, and I don't want to minimize anybody's experience at all, or realities. I mean, I have a friend, color who was.
So should the legislature address it?
What's that?
So should the legislature address that in some form?
Well, few thoughts just popped right through my head. Here's here's probably the best example I can give. There was a bill that just ran in 2019 to, it was an education related bill to prevent bullying for a certain protected class of students. And I just asked the bill sponsor in the hearing, I said, you know, I think all of us would agree that bullying is not okay. It's never okay for any student to bully another student. So can't we just, you know, broaden that language to say, you know, bullying, we're going to teach that bullying shouldn't happen. And, you know, if you're a student, hey, you know, Johnny, Jenny, whoever, you know, you should always treat them with kindness and respect, like you'd want to be treated, right? Love your neighbors yourself. And the sponsor basically said to me, well, that is already law today. So in my mind, you know, bullying, if you take it at that level, we're talking about there in education and among students, but broaden that out, right? If you look
So I'm not clear. Do you think should the legislature address it, or do we already have enough policies and laws in place?
I think that there are laws in place. It should be taught, you know, in schools, in my opinion, that students shouldn't bully another student, regardless of who they are, regardless of what they look like, no matter what.
Okay, I did. Thank you. I want to move on. Tanisha, do you think the legislature should address systemic racism?
I think this probably is a question that calls for more than just a couple minute discussion.
Sure.
So I will try to make this. I will try to make my comments as quick as possible for time's sake. I am a proud, strong woman of color. I am half white, half black. My father's family was one of the first African-American families here in Vancouver back in the early 1940s. I am a sister of a police officer. And my whole entire life and my professional career and personally too, I have fought for social and racial justice. The last 6, 7, 8 months, I can tell you, have not been easy at times. You find yourself having a lot of difficult conversation with family and friends and people in the community. There has been an uprising in this community across our country about the need for social and racial justice, for elected leaders to listen. I'm not saying that we have all the answers. This is an issue and problem we've been facing with for over 400 years. But I do know as an elected official, it's our job to listen and to not always maybe internalize or compare to your own experiences, but to listen to the families that are here in this community and what they have faced when it comes to housing, when it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to business, promotions at work, in education, in the legal criminal justice. What the state legislature can do, besides just listening, because I know many of them are listening, is look at legislation through an equity lens. And I know that work has been ongoing now for several years as well too. Work to see what is happening in terms of best practices. There's a lot of companies and business and private sector companies and business and nonprofits who are doing equity work, who are doing social justice work, who are making sure that everybody's being brought to the table and listening to folks. I have the great experience and pleasure and privilege of working at the YWCA Clark County, and which our mission statement is empowering women, eliminating racism, and fighting for social justice for all people. It is our responsibility as elected officials to do just that. When we are expecting, when people want answers from us, you have seen over the course of past months, more people attending their school board meetings and city council meetings and county council meetings, looking at budgets. They're looking at the agenda. They're looking into what department does what. And they are applying an equity lens. My shared experiences as a woman of color here in Clark County, some are good, some are bad. And to just dismiss that as doesn't happen is completely wrong and unacceptable. And I think it goes into a bigger picture of how do we treat people? I do agree, we should be treating people with respect, and people, regardless of how God created them, should not be bullied. People should not be bullied based on their race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, their gender, socioeconomic status. My faith tells me to love thy neighbor. I am a daughter of a Catholic and a Baptist. And so my Christian faith plays a role with me every single day in the things that I do and how I treat people. And that faith for me says to be open mind, have an open mind and have an open heart when it comes to our families and the people around me and the people in this community. And I think elected officials need to do the same.
Thanks. And yeah, we certainly could get deeper into that. But I do. Go ahead, Vicki.
Just real quickly, I did not say racism doesn't exist. I would hope, I just want to make that clear. That's why I brought up the examples of my experience that I have had. You know, I will say that is something that, again, I go back to, you know, we need to make sure there isn't bullying of anybody, no matter who they are. And the one thing I do want to clarify, my biggest concern is if the legislature tries to not do something irresponsibly. I'm concerned that we are going to, you know, see defunding of law enforcement, which provides security and public safety for our families, our neighbors and communities. And so that's the piece that I am most concerned about. And candidly, Tanisha has on her website, or did as of last Wednesday, the 23rd, you know, that we need to rethink the way we do law enforcement in our country. We prioritize our budgets, reimagine the possibilities. I don't want to have Seattle chop and chaz and Portland protests as the norm in the 17th legislative district or anywhere in the state or nation.
Tanisha, how would you approach police funding?
Yes, and I do not believe my website or myself or anybody from my campaign team have ever used the words defund the police. In fact, I have spoken out against that. I am somebody, like I said, I am a sister of a police officer. I am somebody who works with law enforcement, the work that I do, and I work within the court system. And when we're talking about police reform, we are talking about what do those budgets look like? What are the resources that our police officers, law enforcement need to do their jobs? What job are we asking our law enforcement officials to do? Are we asking them to deal more with mental health? Are we asking them to deal with domestic violence? Are we asking them to deal with sexual assault and rape? Are we asking them to respond to domestic violence phone calls? Are we asking our police officers to respond to shootings? Nobody is asking, certainly not me, asking for the defund of the police. We are looking at how do we reform the police so they can work best within the system that they currently are working in. Do they have enough training and resources so we don't have police brutality, that we do have police accountability? Are budgets prioritizing what is needed in our community? Are we helping and not harming? And when people call the police, are they getting all the assistance that they need? I would never, ever ask my brother or those in law enforcement to do their job without any resources available to them. You know, while there may be some people who want to defund the police and what that interpretation is to them, for me is about rethinking, reform, and reimagining and reprioritizing our resources that we have and working together. You know, we have Vancouver Police has a lot of different programs and task force in place and has different budget structure too, that they are responding to what the community is asking for and is saying, and in some of these rallies as well too. So I think the idea that because I believe in police reform somehow equates to defund the police is absolutely nonsense. And, working in this area of mine for many, many years and having done ride-alongs with police officers, there is a lot happening going on in our communities, in our neighborhoods, and our streets. And everybody, regardless of who they are and what neighborhood they live in, and what zip code they are, and what the color of their skin, wants to be safe. They want to be safe. All of us want to go home to our families and our homes at the end of the day.
And I'm curious, I do want to follow up one thing, Vicki. You mentioned you don't want to see CHOP or the Portland protests become the norm. Does that concern you more than the scenes of police brutality we've seen and chokeholds and people of color being shot by police when they're unarmed?
I was very concerned when we all saw the horrific reality of what happened to George Floyd. That should have never, ever happened, right? That absolutely, in my opinion, was beyond police brutality. I won't even get into the rest of that. And I will say on this note, I actually, and I'm saying this to try to be a positive encouragement on this. As a result of that incident, I actually reached out to Tanisha, and I don't know that she got my phone call, so I don't want anybody to think, oh, and she didn't call back. I called her. We've met before. After the last time we ran against each other, we got together for coffee. I wanted to connect with her and just, talk to her, right? I mean, I think she's a nice person, wanted to try to understand her perspectives. So I was reaching back out after the George Floyd incident for the very same purpose, right? I understand Tanisha is going to have a different perspective than I can possibly have. Now I was hoping to connect and have, a better, just a dialogue and understanding. And like I said, I mean, I don't know that she ever got the message, that I've had a lot of technology problems. I'll say since being in politics, but all of that to say, right, where there are real problems, you better believe it. I would expect, and I do know, like WASPA, the Police Chiefs Association here in Washington, they are addressing it with law officers, and I do believe that law enforcement training should have pretty much like I was saying around the bullying, right? The discussion needs to be before you ever pull the trigger on somebody, before you ever do something that is seriously life altering, make sure you're making the right decision because of the situation, not a person's color, not a person's background, whatever, right? It has to be that approach should be being taught in the trainings. It should be part of, I would hope, as I know police officers have to go through quite a process to become a police officer, right? If there are any red flags along those lines, law enforcement agencies need to be looking for, realities, just like whenever you hire anybody, whenever any business hires someone, you've got to think about what does the job entail? What are they responsible for? Realizing they have to make split decisions in some cases in very difficult circumstances. Someone, was going to do a crime but hadn't yet committed a crime. Or whatever, right? So it's a very challenging situation and reality law enforcement has to do every day, right? I so appreciate the work they do. But yes, I mean, I think as we look at how law enforcement's done, making sure that reality check is very clear and that police officers are really cognizant of that on the whole, and they're not looking at people as what their color is, or, it's the circumstance. You need to look at the circumstance and in a split instance, a lot of times make a decision on what to do with it.
Sure. Okay, I want to move on. Real quick, Vicki, do you believe that climate change exists and that it is a result of human activity?
Oh, Greg, I love this question every single time. My answer really hasn't changed. I'm getting more and more concerned, honestly, as since I've been in the political sphere. Climate change is such an agenda-driving item, and we heard the governor with wildfires talking, blaming all the wildfires we've had on climate change and climate fires. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm sorry, but science and data can be created to look pretty much any way a person wants. And the United Nations took and made climate change a goal back in the 90s. I believe it was around 1992. And it's their number 13 goal, the United Nations.
Okay, do you not believe that it exists?
I do not. Here's what I believe. I believe that over time, based on science and data that I've seen, over millions of years of this Earth, the Earth has been heating and cooling. It goes in cycles. And scientists tell you that. I'd say you look at Al Gore, right? It was global warming. Everybody was global warming. Everything is going to collapse, global warming. And then all of a sudden, oops, the Earth cooled. And so around 2015-ish timeframe, you started hearing, climate change, because you couldn't just say global warming anymore. Really?
So do you believe that it is occurring?
No, not to the agenda driving aspect that it is. No, I think it's been created to help drive agendas, to destroy our businesses. A lot of industries that help and have made America healthy and able to be successful as an economic nation. And systematically, it's been basically undoing our businesses. Will continue to, if things like cap and trade and carbon emissions, taxes, and all these things come about. Yep, it's just going to destroy more American business. So, and the costs will get rolled over to consumers. So, nope, I don't subscribe to climate change. And, you can make up any number you want. We see it all the time, right? So,
okay.
This one,
Tanisha, do you believe climate change is occurring, and is it partly caused by humans?
The answer to both those questions is yes. I believe in climate change, and yes, human activity is a contribution to climate change. And it is something that we have to address. We just cannot just ignore it. And I remember when this editorial board asked this question of us 2 years ago, and I think both myself and Representative Kraft have the same answers that we did 2 years ago, and we are sticking to those positions now. And there is a way that labor and business and industry can come together to deal with climate change, to work towards more green technology and green energy and renewable energy too, and that we can reverse the course that we are on. But it's going to take a lot of effort and people on both sides, and I believe in the science.
Okay.
Can I just say one quick thing on that?
Yeah.
Just fast.
Go ahead.
So here's one of my biggest challenges. Excuse me, and maybe I'd love to ask, the climate experts or, whoever, if carbon emissions are so horrible, humans, we breathe out carbon emissions, right? I mean, CO2. So are we going to get rid of all humans? So we stop breathing? I mean, this is right. I mean, you can take this down a long path.
Do you think that maybe a large pickup truck creates more emissions than the average human?
I haven't looked at the data on that. I'll say it that way. I will say, well, no, I wouldn't bother getting.
Okay, I'm sorry. We're going to keep moving on here. I'm really curious, Vicki. I find this interesting. There are, in many cases, you have been either the only or one of the few dissenting votes. Let's see, you were the only local legislator to vote against House Bill 1216 to enhance school safety. You were the only person in either chamber to vote against a bill to establish a goal of providing high-speed internet service throughout the state by 2024. You were one of two lawmakers out of 147 to vote against the transportation You were the only local lawmaker to oppose the bill to exempt the legislature from parts of the Public Records Act. And that's not a criticism.
No, not that one especially.
So should voters view that as extremism, or in those cases, the only person on the right side of these issues?
I would view it and as a voter, as the constituents, I would hope you know that I have the political courage to stand alone and stand up for you and your voice. So the question was mentioned earlier or stated by Tanisha about, I don't know if anybody has political courage. I have political courage. I will stand alone if I have to for you. And so a couple of things. The Public Records Act, that was an issue, huge controversial issue, as I know Greg knows, in the Columbian,
Sure.
Because effectively it was designed to, it was changing the transparency of the legislature to public records requests. And, there were some reasons to vote for it, but absolutely there was no due process. That bill was rushed through. There were some things I was very concerned about relating to transparency of the legislature and the accountability aspect, of that going through. So I was one of probably a handful-ish of legislators, that voted against that. As far as the school safety bill, there were some concerns I had on that, whether there would be a database, kept in place. There were some other concerns with how I don't have the bill in front of me, but there was a specific portion of the bill that I read that was very concerning. And effectively, I was concerned that the law enforcement officers were, they were being basically, instead of being able to do their job to protect the kids, which is their first and foremost responsibility, they were being their hands tied a bit from being able to do what their main job is, and that is to protect the students. So, I had concerns. I wasn't ultimately like, no, I'll never do this. But at that time, I had concerns on that bill, so I voted no. I can't remember some of the others you mentioned, but anyway. So,
yeah, no, I was just curious. And again, for example, the Public Records Act, that was the one where many newspapers across the state, including the Columbian, wrote, we published front page editorials urging the governor to veto it, which he did. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, I found that interesting that you often do stand alone on those. We're going to move ahead now. Is Scott or Ben, do you have anything specific? Okay, well, then to the candidates, give us your final pitch for why voters should support you, and feel free to mention any notable endorsements if you like. And we'll start with Vicki.
Thank you. Well, again, thank you all here at the Columbian for having Tanisha and I to be able to have this discussion. I really do appreciate it, because I think it's important for people to be able to hear directly from those running for office, where they stand on different issues and their viewpoints. So thank you for that. I will just say it's been a real pleasure and honor to serve you in the 17th Legislative District, every person, all of you in the 17th Legislative District. I work hard to listen. My door is always open, whether in session, not in session, at any time. I do care and want to hear your view. Even if we don't agree, we can respectfully agree to disagree. As we just discussed, I have been very much one of political courage and have stood strong for you, your constitutional rights and your freedoms, no matter who you are. And I will continue to do that. I have stood up for parents' voices very strongly. I stood up for parents' voices who said no, and to 10,000 on a survey who said no, but OSPI and everybody in the legislature ignored them. On comprehensive sex ed, there's many parents that are very concerned about the comprehensive sex ed bill that just passed. I stood up, I was the leading legislator fighting against that legislation and standing up for parents' voices. I will always stand up and make sure that we are working to protect our students from material that's opens the door to extremely graphic material that you and I would blush at if we were talking about it. And I've also stood very consistently against taxes. I believe this is your money that is up in Olympia. We need to be extremely prudent with it. We don't need to take more of it. You've suffered enough, and I will always work to make sure that we are protecting the taxpayers' money, and we'll stand against those taxes. So with that, I just ask for your vote, and you can visit vickikraft.com to see my full list of endorsements there. Was thankful that Association of Washington Business, National Federation of Independent Businesses were supportive of me, as well as Human Rights Life PAC.
Okay, thank you. And Tanisha?
Thank you. And thank you to the Columbian, and thank you to all of the voters and everybody here in Clark County who will be watching this in the next couple of days. And when they get their ballots in mid-October, we'll be looking at what the Columbian has to say, and we'll be looking at our websites. For me, it's about representation that matters and meaningful results, and the respect of the diversity that we have here in Clark County and in the 17th LD. And people want accountability, and they want legislators that they can be proud of. And they can say, that is my legislator. They work for me. They get results. They come to the table. They don't argue, yell, or scream. They work with people in the community. They respect our school districts. They work with our county and our city elected officials. I am running because this is my hometown. And for the last 4 years, I've seen that our 17th deserves better. We deserve better representation in Olympia too. And we have heard from many, many families and constituents here in the 17th. And when the voting record of Representative Kraft gets exposed, you had mentioned some of those lone no votes, but voting against ending of conversion therapy, voting against lowering the cost of insulin for our families here in the Washington state, voting against certain mental health services. That says a lot. It says a lot to our families, and I feel that we can do better. I would not ask for the voters' vote of confidence in me if I didn't believe in myself and my capabilities of being a state legislator, of representing our community. That is a great community to live in, and wanting to work across the aisle to get things done and to be the very best Clark County. Clark County is growing, and we need to make sure that our voices are heard loud and clear in Olympia. And that is why I am proud to have the endorsements such as the Washington State Labor Council and the Washington Nurses Association and Education Association, and also the endorsement of the Vancouver Firefighters and the Washington State Firefighters Council, and that also of the Clark County Realtors Association. It's a cross-section of support that people have for our campaign, and I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of all our volunteers and our donors to our campaign, that we are moving forward in a positive way, and we are determined to bring real representation and real results back to Clark County. Thank you.
Great. Well, Vicki and Tanisha, thank you both very much for joining us.
Good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.